So I think I make a start now, and there can still be participants joining us, which is absolutely wonderful. So very warm welcome to our audience, a very warm welcome to all of you, and good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are joining us here today. This is our 5th lecture in the preparatory lecture series on the road to COP26 and CMAC3, and we are now really on this final stretch of the road. I'm absolutely delighted that this lecture series so far has been really successful. We've attracted many participants for each lecture from among different countries, 70 different countries, participants from 70 different countries were joining us on average for each of these lectures, which is absolutely fantastic. And many have also used the opportunity to watch the recordings or to stream it live on various other media tools. So it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to do this. And this is jointly organized by Niloufar Oral and Christina Vogt and myself. So Niloufar Oral, you know her very well, an absolute established scholar in this field, who is the director of the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore, and Christina Vogt is a professor of law in Oslo University, and she's also the chair of the specialist group on climate change of the World Commission for Environmental Law of the IUCN, and the chair of the Paris Agreement's Implementation and Compliance Committee. And it is an absolute pleasure with you to welcome today Stephen Minas, Professor Minas. We are really grateful that you are going to share your expertise today with us. And the topic of your talk is advancing technology development and transfer under the Paris Agreement. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing your lecture. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you, because you've got a vast amount of experience in the field, not just from the scholarly perspective, but also from real practical insights, because you have followed these negotiations very closely, and you also have a very important position. And now let me come to that. So you are associate professor at the School of Transnational Law of Peking University and a research senior fellow at the Transnational Law Institute of the King's College in London. And you also did your PhD there. Now, you were the vice chair of the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee, TEC, and you are now the chair of the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee. So very warm congratulations on this important position. Now, your research concerns the novel transnational processes of law, policy, and dispute resolution that address the emerging sustainable economy, and you are focusing on this nexus of climate change, finance, energy, and technology, which I think is absolutely fascinating research agenda. And his research draws on legal doctrine and practice, including public international law, private international law, energy law, financial law, but also European Union law. And so previously he has worked as a visiting lecturer at King's College London, and also served as an advisor to the government of the Australian state of Victoria. And they are working on a variety of policy and legal areas, and also for members of the Australian Parliament. And Professor Minas is also admitted as an Australian lawyer, so clearly has the practical expertise as well, on top of the strong scholarly expertise. And he has completed the Hong Kong International Arbitration Centre's Tribunal Secretary Accreditation Program, and is an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. And he's also a member of the EU team in UN climate negotiations, and has published really widely and taught in international law, EU law, climate change, energy law, and has always maintained this focus also on technology and financial instruments. So I'm very much looking forward, and without any further ado, the floor is yours. I hand over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Petra, for that generous introduction. And just as I share my screen here, I just want to thank the organizers, certainly Petra, Christina, and Nilla for the introduction to participate in this very interesting series of lectures, and I think a very important series of lectures as we work towards a critical moment, a critical meeting in international climate governance. It's a particular delight for me also to be part of an event that is co-hosted by the World Commission on Environmental Law, which I'm delighted to be a part of, and is a wonderful institution. So colleagues, let me say just at the beginning that I'm speaking here in an entirely personal capacity, and just as one scholar offering whatever insights I may or may not have to offer. But as it has been noted, my topic here is particularly technology development and transfer under the Paris Agreement. And the question of where does technology fit into international climate law, international climate governance, is something that I've been thinking about for some years as a PhD student, as a negotiator, and in various other capacities. What I found when I started my PhD was that there wasn't a great deal of scholarly work that had been done on this topic. It's very much been in the shadow of climate finance, which is self-evidently important and interesting. But what we've seen, particularly since the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015, is greater attention to technology per se, which of course is linked to finance, and to how technology can help us to implement and to achieve our goals, particularly under the Paris Agreement. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And just to give a brief outline of the lecture, I do want to begin with some comments on what are we talking about when we talk about climate technology. What is it? What isn't it? Why is it relevant to climate governance? And then spend quite a bit more time on the current international legal frameworks for climate technology. Of course, this was first addressed by the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change, but the legal framework has developed very significantly since then, both under the convention and more particularly under the Paris Agreement of 2015. And then, of course, we have a legal framework, but how is it being implemented? What are the key actors? What are the key areas of work when it comes to implementation? And what I want to suggest in this area is that, of course, the UN climate institutions have an important role, and I've seen that also from the inside, but they are far from the whole story, or even the most important part of the story. The real test of these institutions is how they can catalyze activity and action within parties, within governments, and also very importantly within the private and research sectors. So a lot of the work that we're doing currently in this space is really about collaborations. It's really about trying to join up actors who may all be relevant, but which have not always had action channels in order to coordinate their work. And then finally, I want to spend a bit of time particularly on this question of the road to COP26 and look at the developments in climate technology. We're of course meeting one day after the conclusion of the first ever virtual UNFCCC session. I won't say a negotiating session, of course, but a session of very significant informal consultations that also touched on the topic of technology. We, of course, have additional work in the UN climate bodies between now and the COP to go on with. And then, of course, at the COP, and this is common to a lot of different areas of negotiation, we have a very crowded agenda also on the topic of climate technology. We're essentially having two COPs in one, 2 years in one. So there's a lot of work to be prepared in the months ahead. Now, first of all, on this question of what is a climate technology, This is a concept which has been defined very broadly in the international climate system. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, quite a few years ago now, attempted to define climate technology as any piece of equipment, technique, practical knowledge, or skills for performing a particular activity that can be used to face climate change. So clearly, this concept of technology is not limited to what we might immediately think of as the hardware of technology, physical tools, whether that be a solar panel or the apparatus of seawalls and other physical artifacts which are important to mitigation or adaptation outcomes. But it also includes what we refer to as software. So processes, knowledge, and skills are needed to install and manage technologies. And this element has been a highly important element when it comes to technology transfer and whether technology transfer from one place to another is successful and unsuccessful. And we also have this element of so-called orgware, organizational technologies, institutional mechanisms to support the acquisition and management of technologies. So in studying climate technologies, we are also studying people and institutions and how they interact with the physical and indeed these days the digital infrastructure of technology. It's all included, and it's all, I would suggest it's difficult to disentangle these elements when we talk about successful or unsuccessful outcomes. Of course, climate technology is equally relevant to mitigation and adaptation, and we also have, in addition to technologies that are obviously targeted at mitigation or adaptation, I've already mentioned a couple, cross-cutting or general purpose technologies that are equally relevant to mitigation and adaptation, and the general digital technologies, digitization, are obviously relevant here. Now, in terms of, if we accept that that's what climate technology is, what is its salience in international climate governance? I would suggest that there are a few elements here, and they overlap. First of all, technology has long been identified as a means of implementation. It is one of the means, which include finance and capacity building, as well as technology, by which countries, and particularly developing countries, achieve their technology goals and targets. And this is an old and well accepted concept from the earliest years of the UNFCCC system. Of course, that means that technologies in the UNFCCC system, and also more broadly, have very much been identified as a key form of support to developing countries in terms of pursuing climate mitigation and adaptation. So there is a very particular role for technologies, technology development and transfer, in assisting developing countries, and that's been a consistent thread in the last 30 years of the international climate system. More broadly, however, we can say that obviously the relevance of climate technologies is not limited to support for developing countries. And if we look at this at a global level, we can say that technologies, and in particular technological innovation and change, is a key enabler of higher ambition. And you need only look at the changes that we can identify from International Energy Agency reports from 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, and what is being predicted today in terms of possible pathways to see the technological development. And by that I mean innovation of technologies, but also changes in price, changes in availability, etc., bring more ambitious climate targets within reach. And then, of course, related to that is this notion of transformational change that both the UNFCCC system, but also the Green Climate Fund with its concept of paradigm shift are pursuing, the idea that we need a systems change, not just incremental progress to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and technology has a role to play there. And in this scheme from a Technology Executive Committee publication of last year, we see that a lot of the suggested interventions and policies for increasing the role of technology in contributing to climate action are not just or even mostly about what we would consider scientific innovation, but they're actually about business models, about engaging key stakeholders, access to funding, etc. So this is very much a social, legal, and management space, as well as what would be traditionally considered a technology space. And just one example of the role of technology, and I'm borrowing here from an IRENA publication of 2 years ago, that when we look, for example, at the transformation of the energy system, and particularly the electricity system, then we have innovations in power, particularly in storage, of course, but then we have also cost reductions. We have the changes to a system, electricity systems, enabling flexibility, and then with outcomes of low carbon, reliable and affordable secure energy systems, solving the energy trilemma. So all of this is about technology, but it is about changing social systems and changing markets, as well as it is about technological innovation itself in order to achieve climate goals, or in this case, a sub-goal in terms of flexible, renewable powered electricity. So climate technology is a broad concept, but that is what we're dealing with here. Now, as I've mentioned, the UN climate system has included provision for technology since its very beginning, since the adoption of the 1992 Climate Convention. And although I can't go into it in any great detail, there is also a long history of technology governance even before the convention. There is a very old debate from the UN General Assembly in respect of the role of technology transfer in international governance, and particularly in assisting developing countries. The idea of a new international economic order, the idea of an international agreement on technology transfer in general, not limited to climate technology. All of that is the backdrop, the backstory, the context for what happened in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, when a number of multilateral environmental agreements included provision for technology. And the UNFCCC is one example of that. There are others, of course. So what we can say is that the UNFCCC was negotiated in a context where there had been no consensus in the international community on some kind of mandatory technology transfer mechanism. And what we have here in this text is very much a compromise between different positions. And this compromise has been perpetually re-examined, renegotiated, reinterpreted in the years since, and it's not unique in that case. But if we look at the convention, we see that Article 4.5 provides that developed countries shall take all practical steps to promote, facilitate, and finance as appropriate the transfer of or access to environmentally sound technologies and know-how to other parties, particularly developing country parties, to enable them to implement the provisions of the convention. So this is what I was talking about, means of implementation. Essentially, developed countries assisting developing countries with technology on the understanding that this helps them to achieve their work under the convention. And that's captured even more explicitly in Article 4.7. The extent to which developing country parties will effectively implement their commitments depends on the effective implementation by developing countries of their commitments relating to finance and technology. Now, there's been some debate about the legal effect or the legal intent of Article 4.7. Again, we can go into this perhaps in the questions, but suffice it to say, it recognizes the reality that countries with limited resources will be able to do more on climate change if they're assisted with finance and technology. And that's been, I think, a fairly uncontroversial point, although, as I say, interpretations differ. Now, that's what the convention said, but it took quite a number of years for agreement to be found on how to operationalize, how to implement the technology content of the convention. And if we look at this process in general, the next big agreement was, of course, in this space, the Marrakesh Conference in 2001, which adopted for the first time a framework on technology transfer under the convention. It requested the Global Environment Facility, which, as Professor Freestone discussed in a previous session, was the first operating entity of the financial mechanism of the convention to support the implementation of the technology transfer framework. And it established this initial advisory body, the expert group on technology transfer, which is in many respects the predecessor of the TEC, although it's different in some ways. Now, this technology transfer framework, we won't look at this in detail, but suffice it to say that it established or recognized technology needs assessments, which have been an enduring part of the architecture of technology action under the convention, also now under the Paris Agreement, and which we'll discuss further today. Now, almost 10 years later, we're galloping along here, but of course, the Marrakesh Accords did a couple of things. They operationalized elements of the convention, such as technology transfer. They set up the flexibility instruments of the Kyoto Protocol, but it soon became apparent that parties would negotiate a further new and universal climate agreement, what ultimately became the Paris Agreement. And there are reasons for this, which I won't go into. But part of the negotiation for that agreement included an understanding amongst parties from 2007 that technology would be one of the 4 pillars of this new agreement. So essentially, parties agreed to agree to do more on technology. Much of the technical work had been done by the time of the Copenhagen conference in 2009. Of course, that was famously unsuccessful in various ways, although very important. But then in 2010, the COP picked up the pieces of Copenhagen, developed them somewhat further. And in the case of technology, the COP decided to establish this new institution, the technology mechanism, with the goal of facilitating enhanced action on technology development and transfer. So this is a body established under the Climate Convention, accountable to the Conference of Parties, the COP, and consisting of 2 components. First of all, the Technology Executive Committee, which replaced the expert group on technology transfer, and in many ways is an evolution on that older group. But the new and the more interesting element, the novel element, was this new Climate Technology Center and Network. And this body fulfilled the ask or the hope of many developing country delegations to have a body that actually implements technology development and transfer particularly to assist developing countries. So 2010 is a very important milestone in the development of the implementing architecture of international climate technology governance. Now, just to spend a few minutes on these two bodies and what they do. First of all, the TEC. The TEC is one of a growing number of so-called constituted bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and or the Paris Agreement. And these are thematic bodies that the governing body, the COP, has established in order to perform certain functions, typically to provide advice, recommendations, research, etc., to the COP on the particular topic. There are many examples. Of course, Christina has spoken in a previous lecture about the Implementation and Compliance Committee. The Adaptation Committee is another. I won't go through them all. But this TEC is focused obviously on technology, and it provides recommendations, key messages to the COP. It works with other institutions such as the Standing Committee on Finance. It provides publications. It engages in events. Now, the composition of the TEC, it includes 20 members. And although these members are elected from different party constituencies, obviously including developed and developing parties, the members of the TEC serve in their personal capacity. So the idea here, and it's sometimes worked better than others, but the idea is that the TEC is not a negotiating body. It is not a meeting of parties or delegates. The members of the TEC are obliged to use their own judgment and to act in their personal capacity as experts in some sense in climate technology. So that's the idea. Now, the other point to make about the way that the TEC works is that it is not just the members of the TEC ploughing through the work plan and doing the work of the TEC. In fact, the TEC, or let me say it this way, observers, non-party observers are integral, essential contributors to the work of the TEC. So the TEC works in a number of thematic task forces, and each of these task forces are open to the participation of observers from a number of observer constituencies, including international organizations, environmental NGOs, business NGOs, research and independent NGOs. And all of these observers, in fact, participate in the task forces and are very important contributors to the work of the TEC. They also, by the way, contribute actively to the plenary meetings of the TEC. So that's I think, a brief introduction to the TEC and its composition. And I think the TEC is an example of a very important development in UNFCCC governance more broadly over the last 10 years, which has been to recognize the integral role of observers and non-party stakeholders. And this is just one small example of that. Now, the Climate Technology Center and Network is a more complex institution. It is the implementation arm of the technology mechanism, and it provides a variety of services. The service that consumes most of its work is providing technical assistance at the request of developing countries. More on that later. It also curates and hosts a very growing collection of information resources on climate technology. And it is also responsible for organizing outreach and networking activities, particularly regional meetings and meetings of a thematic nature. The structure of the CTC, and as I said, it's a bit more complex than the TEC. The CTCN is composed of both a center and a network. The center was awarded to be hosted by UNEP, the UN Environmental Programme, in collaboration with UNIDO after a competitive bidding process. In terms of the legal form, there is a legal, or rather a memorandum of understanding between the COP on the one hand and UNEP on the other, which regulates this arrangement. The Secretariat is based in Copenhagen, and its role is essentially a role of management and coordination of the CTCN's activities. It is the network, however, which I think is the innovative aspect of this CTCN. The actual substantive work of responding to technical assistance requests from developing countries is performed by members of the network and members of a smaller group called the consortium. But essentially, the network is a vast, disparate network of institutions from the research sector, the private sector, and institutions of other kinds, some international organizations, who are eligible to participate in the CTCN's activities and which are based all around the world. Various regional, sectoral expertise, various language competences, etc. So this is how a relatively small international secretariat is able to mobilize expertise from around the world to contribute to climate technology governance. There is also an advisory board, which, although it's not engaged in the day-to-day management of the CTCN, has a very important role, particularly in terms of endorsing the appointment of the director of the CTCN, as well as the budget and the financial statement, and approving the CTCN's program of work. Now, as I said, the network, now it's almost 650 members. So it's very, very much grown. As you see here, it's almost half private sector organizations, 20% research and academic institutions. It should be noted that just around 10% of network members have participated in the provision of technical assistance. So 650 is a big number, but some members have been more active than others, and that's a matter of public record. And we can see that there's a great diversity in terms of the network. Now, the advisory board. I've already mentioned that one of the important changes in UNFCCC governance in the last 10 years has been a recognition of the importance of non-party stakeholders. Another equally important development has been to get this burgeoning collection of UN climate organizations and bodies collaborating with each other, talking to each other. And the advisory board tries to institutionalize this. So in addition to having government representatives, equally from Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties, and unlike the TEC, these are representatives of governments and of parties. You also have representatives from the TEC, the GCF, although that seat has not yet been taken, the Adaptation Committee, Standing Committee on Finance, and then a number of observer constituencies from business, research, environmental NGOs. So the structure of the CTCN Advisory Board is very much designed to bring in all, well, not all, but many of the relevant stakeholders to the CTCN's work, obviously with the intent that the decisions of the board then benefit from that broader and diverse expertise. So these bodies were established in 2010, the TEC and the CTCN, setting up the CTCN, operationalizing. It took a few more years, as you would expect. And then, of course, in 2015, we have the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is the next major development in international climate technology law. Now, fortunately, in my view, the Paris Agreement did not further tinker with the institutions which had only recently been established. It rather adopted those institutions, and it also set out new frameworks for cooperation and captured new understandings as to what climate technology governance under the Paris Agreement should be. And the critical article here is Article 10 of the Paris Agreement, and it does 6 distinct things. So first of all, it notes that parties share a long-term vision on the importance of fully realizing technology development and transfer in order to improve resilience to climate change and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that, of course, is a very broad statement. We cannot ascribe much legal effect to it, but it's a general statement. Now, paragraph 2 goes on to say that parties noting the importance of technology for the implementation of mitigation and adaptation actions under this agreement and recognizing existing technology deployment and dissemination efforts shall strengthen cooperative action on technology development and transfer. So this is one of the shall statements in the Paris Agreement. But we can see also that it would be impossible as a matter of a court of law, even if there was a court of competent jurisdiction, to say that a party had failed in this obligation. So it's framed as a hard obligation. It is in fact a soft obligation, but nevertheless it is very important in terms of the intent that it registers to strengthen cooperative action. Now, more concretely, paragraph 3 provides that the technology mechanism established under the convention shall serve this agreement. Now, this is significant in a number of ways. First of all, it imports the 2 institutions, the CTCN and the TEC, which continue to serve the Climate Convention. It creates a mandate for them to also serve the Paris Agreement. Now, it also, in my view, and I'd be interested in colleagues' opinion on this, it also seems to change the status of the technology mechanism in the UNFCCC normative hierarchy. And what I mean by that is that the TEC and the CTCN were established by a COP decision in 2010. And of course, it would be entirely open to the COP, should it wish to do so, to wind up these institutions, or at least that was the case until the Paris Agreement. But with Article 10.3, what we see is the technology mechanism has become an integral part of the Paris architecture, in the absence, of course, of a relevant amendment to the Paris Agreement. So the technology mechanism seems to be here to stay, according to a basic reading of Article 10.3. And then there's the question of the technology mechanism established under the convention. Does that mean that the mechanism cannot be modified in terms of its components? It's an open question. But I think the Article 10.3 is very significant in creating institutional stability in this space under the Paris Agreement. The other key operational point here is Article 10.4, which provides a technology framework is hereby established to provide overarching guidance to the work of the technology mechanism in promoting and facilitating enhanced action on technology development and transfer. So what we have here is a new framework which didn't exist at the time of the Paris Agreement, but which was adopted in Katowice in 2018. And it is a framework addressed to the technology mechanism. And there's some legal significance to that as well. The previous technology transfer framework under the Climate Convention was addressed to various stakeholders, including parties. Now, as I think is uncontroversial, apart from some very specific exceptions, it is generally held that COP decisions are not per se legally binding or capable of creating obligations as between parties to a convention, to say nothing of third parties, of course. COP decisions have often been referred to as soft law. I won't get into that. But what's important to note here is that as part of the internal institutional law of a given international institution, in this case, the COP, the law created by decisions such as a COP decision or a CMA decision is in fact binding internally on the internal apparatus of this particular international legal order. So in fact, a technology framework or any kind of COP or CMA decision is binding, is controlling on bodies such as the technology mechanism, which exist only within this internal legal order, as a question, I would argue, of international institutional law. So it is significant in a legal sense, but it is only significant from the perspective of the addressee, which is the technology mechanism. Now, Article 10.5 is more thematic. It provides that accelerating, encouraging, and enabling innovation is critical for an effective long-term global response to climate change, etc. Such efforts shall be, as appropriate, supported, including by the technology mechanism and through financial means by the financial mechanism. For collaborative approaches to research and development and facilitating access to technology, in particular early stages of the technology cycle to developing parties. Now, this paragraph addressed the concerns of developing countries that they were not being assisted at the early stages of the technology cycle, at the research and development stages, and it, as we see, commits both the technology mechanism and the financial mechanism, the GCF and the GEF, to provide support, although that's qualified by as appropriate. Nevertheless, all of these bodies have in fact responded to this mandate. And then Article 10.6, which is the final technology paragraph, is the dedicated general support clause. Support, including financial support, shall be provided to developing country parties for the implementation of this article, including for strengthening cooperative action on technology development and transfer at different stages of the technology cycle, with a view to achieving balance between support for mitigation and adaptation. So we can contrast this with Article 4.5 of the Climate Convention. And the main contrast, of course, is that whereas Article 4.5 said where the support had to come from, Article 10.6 says only where support will go to developing country parties, but it does not, for example, make developed countries exclusively responsible for providing that support. Again, as a practical matter, of course, most of the support is being provided by developed countries, and that's entirely appropriate. But this also allows for the very important ability of other parties and other institutions to provide support, which is essential. The paragraph also provides for the global stocktake to take support for climate technology into account, and I'll have a bit more to say about that. So that essentially is what the Paris Agreement does on climate technology. The very fact that the agreement includes a dedicated article on technology, which is something that neither the Climate Convention nor the Kyoto Protocol did, is a sign of the greater prominence of technology in climate governance under Paris, again, as a result of the Bali mandate in 2007. So in result of Article 10, the adopting decision, Decision 1 at Paris, essentially tasked the SUBSTA, the subsidiary body on scientific and technological advice, to develop the technology framework, and also provided for a periodic assessment of the technology mechanism. And I'll have more to say about that as well. So just on that, so these were the technology elements of the Paris Agreement work program, and resulted in the technology elements of the so-called Paris Rulebook, which, as Petra described in her lecture, remains incomplete, but is mostly complete and is complete in respect of technology. So we have, as a practical matter, this new technology framework under the Paris Agreement, and we also have the periodic assessment of the technology mechanism. Now, as I've said, the technology framework provides overarching guidance to technology mechanism. That is the TEC and the CTCN. This word overarching is very important. This document is not supposed to micromanage the work of these two institutions, but it provides an overall framework for their work. It is supposed to be improving their effectiveness and efficiency. It lays down the principles of coherence, inclusiveness, as I've already mentioned, results orientation, transformational approach. So there's that idea of transformational change under Paris, and very importantly, transparency. And there's been some discussion of transparency in recent days in the context of the June session. Suffice it to say that the work of the technology mechanism has always provided for transparency. Now, the technology framework provides for work of the TEC and the CTCN under 5 key themes: innovation, implementation, enabling environment and capacity building, collaboration and stakeholder engagement, and support, which is not limited to financial support. And in terms of practically how the technology framework is implemented, it has been implemented through the respective work programs of the TEC and the CTCN. So in 2019 in particular, both of those two bodies were looking at the development of subsequent work programs, and they spent a lot of time factoring in the technology framework. Now, just an example of the technology framework, I suppose in particular from a legal perspective, we can see that the actions and activities in the area of enabling environment and capacity building are actually quite broad. So example B, facilitating countries in enhancing an investment-friendly environment, including national strategies and action plans, policy environment, legal and regulatory frameworks, etc. So it was for the two bodies to figure out how they, within their own modalities, could implement the different elements of the technology framework. And that's what we've seen. Periodic assessment of the technology mechanism, again, is a tool of governance. It is meant to review periodically every 5 years, both the effectiveness and the adequacy of the support provided to the technology mechanism. The first such periodic assessment will be initiated at COP26. So that's the legal framework. Now, in the minutes left to me, I want to say a bit about how this framework for climate technology is in fact being implemented. And as already mentioned, so far I've spoken mostly about the technology mechanism, but it's certainly not all about the technology mechanism. It is also, as we've seen, the GEF and the GCF have an important role to play here, as well as other international institutions which are not directly answerable to the COP, but which are very relevant in this space, such as international financial institutions. Obviously, the implementation at party level, both in terms of nationally determined contributions and in terms of the support that wealthier parties are providing to other parties, is also key. And then the collaborations that can be catalyzed to bring in the private sector, bring in the research sector, etc. And the technology and financial mechanisms have a role to play there. One of the most enduring tools of implementation of technology, and this is also relevant today, is the technology needs assessment. So this is the process that countries, particularly developing countries, have undergone to identify priority sectors and technologies at national levels, to identify barriers, but also enabling frameworks, and then to develop more specific particular technology action plans to identify opportunities for progress. And this work has been ongoing now for many years, and it remains supported by the tech and also by the financial mechanism. Now, the work of the tech under the technology framework, I'm not going to read through all this, but I'm very happy to provide these slides. And this is just to indicate that the tech has integrated the different areas of activity, the different key themes of the Paris Technology Framework under its work plan. So, for example, the work to develop a paper on the linkages between the technology needs assessment process, which I've just mentioned, and nationally determined contributions, which are central to the Paris architecture, is just one example of how the tech is responding to this new environment. I've already mentioned enabling environments. In support, there is a very heavy agenda here, both of what we might consider theoretical, well, not theoretical, but policy research publications, but also active collaboration with the GEF, the GCF, the Standing Committee on Finance, and so forth. And of course, all of these publications are publicly available, and they are being added to on a month-to-month basis. Now, how is the CTCM responding to the Paris Agreement? The core deliverable of the CTCM, I would argue, continues to be responding to technical requests from technical assistance from developing countries. What we see here, interestingly, is that the demand for technical assistance from the CTCN has actually been quite robust during the pandemic. And although practically many projects have been affected, as all kinds of work have been affected, the pipeline of technical assistance has continued to grow. There is particularly strong demand from Africa, as we see here, also from Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean. In terms of sectors, agriculture and water dominate adaptation, energy efficiency and renewables, perhaps unsurprisingly, are dominating mitigation, but with growth in the area of sustainable transport as well. So going beyond the technology mechanism, the role of the financial mechanism is very important as well. And there is a long-standing mandate for stronger collaboration between the technology bodies and the financial bodies, which has been from time to time renewed by the COP. Now, obviously, the financial mechanism includes the GEF and the GCF. However, I include the Adaptation Fund here, which is also servicing the Paris Agreement and which has its own collaboration with the CTCN. So the Global Environment Facility has long provided support for technology transfer, including through a series of regional technology centers hosted in multilateral development banks, also providing support for technology needs assessments. The support from the GEF continues under its current GEF7, not the G7, of course, and that work is ongoing, as well as support for adaptation with its cities collaboration with the CTCN and UNIDO. The GCF, obviously a newer institution, also established in 2010, Its internal legal framework provides for technology at various points, including in its governing instrument, including in its investment framework and criteria, and very importantly, in the contractual basis of its collaboration with its accredited entities, the actual implementing entities of GCF Finance, in terms of the conditions and covenants of the funded activity agreements. So as lawyers, we think about how the sometimes nebulous world of climate governance turns itself into hard law, and it's often by contract. And this is an example of that. Specifically, the GCF has been providing support for technology needs assessment through its readiness finance program. The readiness finance is also a linkage with the CTCN, which I can discuss in further detail if there's an interest. And as mentioned, the Adaptation Fund is also now collaborating with the CTCN on this new Climate Innovation Accelerator facility. So this is essentially micro grants program being administered by the CTCN, and a very new development. And then, of course, the national level. And what we see in the latest synthesis report of NDCs is that there is a very strong presence of technology. Some parties have included technology needs, regulatory and legal aspects, specific technologies of interest, conditional implementation in the case of developing countries who have typically a more ambitious target, which relies on the provision of finance, technology, and capacity building, etc. Interestingly, also South-South, triangular, and regional cooperation. So this is not limited to developing country support. Most NDCs are integrating technology as opposed to having a specific section in their NDC on technology as such. Now, in terms of the linkages between TNAs and NDCs, we have seen that having appropriate legal and regulatory settings is a very important enabler of implementing technology development and transfer. This is an example here from the latest TNA synthesis report from last year from the Secretariat, which we can discuss. And then, of course, when we look at the support that wealthier countries are providing for technology, of course, much of this support is going through UNFCCC institutions, but by no means exclusively. So we also see national and regional development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, other international organizations and initiatives, bilateral and interregional partnerships. And a lot of this information can be found in the Article 9.5 submissions under the Paris Agreement. So just finally, if I might take a few more minutes on the road to Glasgow, and here is the gorgeous town hall in Glasgow. A number of things to note here. First of all, we did just wrap up the virtual consultations, and this apparently is what they look like, at least at some of the time. The technology negotiators discussed the alignment of the periodic assessment of the technology mechanism, which I've already mentioned, and the independent review of the CTCN, which currently takes place every 4 years. It was a very productive discussion, but of course, in this format, no decisions were made, and this topic will be revisited in Glasgow. And then, of course, there were also discussions on the sources of input to the global stocktake and on the reporting of support. And these are topics which are also relevant to technology, although, of course, they're not limited to technology. The TEC and the CTCN will both be very busy between now and the COP. In terms of what is relevant directly to the COP, the TEC will be working on recommendations to the COP and or the CMA on a number of topics here. The typical way that the TEC works is that it commissions and develops a paper. This may or may not include the hosting of an event with relevant experts, It then develops a shorter technology brief, which is on the topic, and may then also have key recommendations and messages to the COP, which is obviously where the most direct input of the tech to the further elaboration of UNFCCC governance occurs. I've referred to this in the past as a form of dialectical regulation, where the COP has the power of decision making, the tech has the standing of expertise, and that's the basis of the dialogue between them. The tech will also be working on its input to the global stocktake. The tech and the CTCN are developing a joint publication on technology and nationally determined contributions. The two bodies formed this year their first ever joint task force working on this topic, including for recommendations to the CMA, and also working together on the very important topic of gender and climate technology. And if I may say so, the tech has taken the lead in this space, although of course it's come far too late. But nevertheless, we are now working on gender. Last year, we appointed our first ever gender focal points, 2 experts, 2 women, one from a developing country, one from a developed country. And they're really championing gender responsiveness, not just in the tech, but also collaborating with other bodies under the UNFCCC. And that's work that we will be taking forward as well. So a very busy agenda that the technology negotiators face at Glasgow. It may be that not all of these items can be considered at Glasgow, but this is what the agenda looks like if you read the mandates. I won't go through these now. Perhaps we can discuss them in the Q&A, but nevertheless, a lot of work that will be put before the COP and the CMA for decision. So just a final question, again, from a legal perspective. Is there such a thing as a law of climate technologies coming from the UNFCCC? I would suggest that there is, but with some important caveats. As we see, there are commitments that parties have entered into, but they tend to be quite vague. They can't really be held to account to these commitments in any legal sense in terms of hard law. Of course, there is no court, there is no arbitral institution, but nevertheless, even if there was, the guidance that the COP and the CMA provide to UNFCCC bodies tends to be more specific, and as I've said, it's more binding as a question of internal international institutional law. That's relevant to the technology mechanism, but also to the GEF and the GCF. And importantly, when dealing with third parties, contractual incorporation, such as the GCF's contracts with its accredited entities, is where we can frame or where we can locate what Bob Wye calls the jurisdictional touchdown or the juridical touchdown of international climate technology law. And of course, last but not least is influence on national law and regulation, including through the implementation of NDCs and technology needs assessments. And with that introduction to climate technology and COP26, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. That was a wonderful and very rich presentation, a very comprehensive overview. So I think that's absolutely educational and a great starting point for what I hope will be a very lively discussion. We've got a few questions already in the Q&A section, so please, to the entire audience, if you could post your questions in that section, that would be wonderful. And also, Christina and Nilofer, I invite you to also post your questions. I will take the privilege to share an observation with you, which is more a broader narrative-related observation. So it's not a detailed question here, but I would also welcome your thoughts on this. And it relates to an aspect that you mentioned at the beginning when you said that the availability and the development of technology will lead to higher ambition. And I'm wondering whether that is still the narrative that we can afford today, where we see that time is running out, and whether or not maybe rising ambition levels need to come first now to bring about these system changes, the transformational changes through technology. And that is not just a wish. I think that is now also something that is recognized in the legal world. And I'm referring to the Constitutional Court in Germany that has delivered an order for constitutional complaints that were brought against the German Climate Protection Act. And I'm not going into the detail of that case. That's a different lecture, perhaps. But in that case, the court said that having a certain target, and a very ambitious target, is a precondition for bringing about these transformational changes in the society in all sectors, because only when we can't any longer use CO2 intensive freedoms and rights and live the way we live, will there be the availability and the willingness to make these changes that are necessary. So to really speed up the process of bringing in the new technology. So I'm just wondering whether this kind of upside down turning of the narrative is anything that can go back from these national levels. I mean, it's not the only court that has made such a ruling, into the tech, for example, but also into the wider COP negotiations, with a specific focus on what the developed nations should be doing. So it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. It's a very important point that you make. And I remember there was some controversy some weeks ago when John Kerry said that technology would provide the solutions, and many were quick to point out that we can't wait for future technology innovation. We have to act now. You're absolutely right. We need stronger ambition and crucially implementation with the technologies that we have now, without waiting for future innovation. And the European Commission has referred to mission-driven innovation. So we set the targets, we set the goals, and then, of course, if there's a need for innovation, that comes after. The Danish Minister for Climate, Dan Jorgensen, likes to say that in Denmark, they set the targets knowing that they couldn't yet achieve them, but that then gave the impetus in the system to develop the targets. So that's entirely legitimate. But we also have to recognize that if you're a government official who's suddenly hit with one of these court judgments or has been pressured by one's colleagues into agreeing a more ambitious NDC, then you have to actually practically do it. And what we know, of course, is that technology is a crucial enabler of that. Both getting access to existing technologies, scaling up existing technologies, and changing the price curve of technologies, but also the innovation of new technologies and new applications of technology. So as a practical matter, I think it's all of the above. And technology has a role to play in that respect. But certainly I agree with you that if there are actors out there saying, well, we don't need to act now because we'll have some magical technology in the future that will save everything, I think that's snake oil. That's another form of climate denial.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I will now delve into the questions here. So we've got a first question from Abhurva Pathak, and the question is, how does the Paris Agreement deal with issues of IPR? So how can the harmony between IPR regimes, for instance, TRIPS, and the Paris Agreement be achieved?
Well, of course, the Paris Agreement doesn't deal with questions of IPR, or it certainly doesn't deal with them in an explicit sense. This is famously a topic on which climate negotiators have not been able to reach any kind of consensus in 30 years and counting. So this is a topic that is not addressed by the Paris Agreement. And essentially the work that is done on technology under the Paris Agreement, also under the Climate Convention, is done in the absence of such a consensus. But what I will say is that the programmatic work of the technology institutions have dealt with questions of IPR from time to time. And some of the recent work that the Technology Executive Committee has done on enabling environments and capacity building has in fact touched on the question of the importance of robust national legal frameworks in creating an environment for technologies to be transferred. So at that level, it's been addressed, but it certainly hasn't been addressed at party level. I should also say that the World Intellectual Property Organization is a long-time collaborator in the work of the technology mechanism, and their institution, or I should say their initiative of WIPO Green, is very relevant in this space.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got another question from Chitsi Okbongbada, and thanking you for the very lucid presentation that was well delivered. So very positive comments here. And she would like to ask, considering the work of implementation done by the institutions under the UNFCCC, why does it seem as if technology transfer remains a sticky point under the Framework Convention, and developing countries have, for instance, called for patent waivers in respect to technology transfer, a suggestion opposed by developed countries who will rely, so it does go back to the first question again a little bit, on the TRIPS agreement. So what are your thoughts on why this is the case?
Thanks for the question. I think this comes back to the same point, that there just is not a consensus on this topic in the, well, there's not globally a consensus, but there's particularly not a consensus within the UNFCCC space. So some parties will tell you that these questions should be handled in other channels, for example, under international trade law. Some parties want these questions to be dealt with under the Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement. And this was discussed in the lead up to the Paris Agreement, but without a consensus. And of course, I should have mentioned, I think it's been mentioned in a previous lecture, that of course, the climate UNFCCC is working on a consensus basis. So consensus doesn't mean 100%, but it does mean that if you have a group of parties that strongly disagree with something, it's not going to get in. Just one final observation, though. I would take issue with the fact, or the idea that technology is a particular sticky point under the UNFCCC. My observation is that the current sticking points are very much elsewhere, and I count myself rather fortunate. But of course, that could change.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the next question.
I see Christina has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Christina. Yes, please.
No problem at all. I just wanted to thank you, Stephen, so much for your lecture and for sharing with us your insights, which date back for such a long time, but also go very deep, because you're so closely involved in the work around technology. So thank you so much, and especially also on behalf of the World Commission on Environmental Law, the IUCN, of which you're a member, and you made us very proud today with giving your lectures. I just wanted to really full-heartedly thank you. But I also do have a question or two. The first question relates to the information on technology that is going into the biennial transparency reports. You only pointed to this issue a little bit. We do know that the biennial transparency reports, which start in 2024, will contain for developed country parties a mandatory information on technology transfer support provided to developing countries. But they also have a voluntary element for developing country parties to include information on technology support, technology transfer support needed and received. And as far as I know, this is fairly new in the landscape of the climate governance. And I just wondered what you expect of that information becoming publicly available from 2024 onward, and then also partly going through a technical expert review, and all that may become part of the facilitative multilateral sharing of progress as the end of the transparency process. How will that affect the landscape of technology transfer? And the second question I have relates to the very excellent questions from the audience on the link to trade, investment, property rights, and so forth. I was just wondering, we see a number of bilateral free trade agreements now being drafted. Some of them have been drafted for quite some time, but not being finalized. But there are provisions on climate, and some of them also contain provisions on technology transfer. Do you see this area of investment, bilateral investment agreements, free trade agreements, being something that could pick up the issue of the relationship between climate and investment law, take it out of the climate world, but put it into these contractual arrangements that we see in this area?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. On the first question of reporting on technology support needed and received, my personal opinion is that this is a very welcome development because we need, I say we, the broader UNFCCC process needs to be a learning process. It needs to have the relevant information before it to react and to change within increasingly tight timeframes. So the idea that you just have developed countries and other parties in a position to do so reporting on the technology of support that they've sent out is of course very important. But we also should know what's being done with it, what have the challenges been, what's worked well, what might be a lesson which could also be applied elsewhere in terms of good practices, and what are the genuine needs. So I'm not sure how it's going to look in detail, but I think this is an important development as well. On the second question, yes, I think international economic agreements have a vital role to play here. And again, it comes back to the fact that not everything can be done under the UNFCCC. Not everything can be done as between 190 odd parties. It's just not practical. So you may not have a consensus globally, but you might have two regions or a number of countries that want to do something particular on environmental goods or environmental services. And in this connection, of course, the European Union, for example, is including the Paris Agreement and climate change in all of its international economic agreements, and in my view, rightly so. So I think there's a very important role for that kind of work, and I'm not even talking about border adjustments or any of that. That's a separate topic entirely. But in terms of collaboration, international economic collaboration, absolutely, there's a very important role to play.
Thank you very much. So I've got a question now from Ulises Patiño Hernandez, who joins us today from Colombia. So thank you so much for joining us. It's really amazing to see that this is such an international audience. Now, he also thanks you, and he asked two full questions. So the first part is, what are the most important legal barriers to overcome, or what kind of legal barriers need to be overcome to accelerate the technology transfer and the implementation of experimental technologies in developing countries? And what would be, this is the second part, your specific recommendations to the Latin American countries in order to overcome these barriers?
Well, there's a lot of recent work that the TEC in particular has done on this question, including by way of surveying actors involved in this space, but also in terms of enabling environments. There are a number of things, basic legal frameworks in respect of property rights, in respect of taxation, in respect of credible dispute resolution arrangements. All of that is generally relevant to investment, but of course it's also relevant to investment in the case of climate change. And then if we're looking more specifically, I would suggest you really have to go sector by sector, because the different climate technologies respond to different legal interventions. So in the case of renewable energy, for example, you need to have, you don't need to have, but I would suggest that you should have the appropriate energy market, electricity market arrangements For example, if you want to encourage distributed renewable energy, then provision for renewable energy communities for prosumers is relevant there. And then, of course, there are various price support, feed-in tariffs, auctions, contracts for difference. There are all sorts of tools which are relevant to particular technologies. And most of them have been trialed somewhere. I'd recommend, in the case of renewable energy, Penelope Crossley's book of recent years, which compares legal frameworks in the area of renewable energy, compares domestic legal frameworks. So there are general legal frameworks, which we refer to as enabling environments, but there are also specific sectoral frameworks. And then, of course, there's also, in terms of developing countries which wish to access international support, you sometimes see particular laws geared at accessing the CDM or the GCF, creating trust funds, creating fiscal arrangements which are appropriate, etc. So all of that has a part to play, depending on what a country wants to do and what its starting position is.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So I invite Christina, Nilofer, and the audience to ask more questions. I've got another question as well, actually, and that relates to the collaboration. You already outlined that there is quite a bit of collaboration between the different bodies under the UNFCCC. So I was wondering, does that extend beyond it, especially under this aspect of technology transfer? So, for example, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer around hydrofluorocarbons and the Kigali Amendment. Would that be anything that is taken into account, and achievements that are being made there in terms of replacing substances and in refrigeration, for example? So is there anything that is taken into account within the tech? Does that play a role?
It's an excellent question. It hasn't really played a role, but to be honest, perhaps it should. I mean, the tech and other bodies have, of course, they have a certain, whatever the opposite of freedom is, they're constrained by their mandates. So these bodies are responding to particular mandates from the COP and the CMA. But it would be interesting. It would be interesting to look at what can be learnt in terms of technology under the Paris Agreement from the Kigali Amendment and its operationalization, and this is more controversial territory, but looking at what the IMO and ICAO are doing or not doing, looking at other relevant international processes. One thing I will say, this is a bit different, but the tech and particularly the CTCN have engaged with other processes which have been developing their own networks. So after the Sustainable Development Goals were set up, part of the New York-based infrastructure for that was the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, I think it's called. And there's been a long-standing discussion amongst officials, at least in those years, about learning lessons across the two. When the CBD Bio Bridge was established, I understand that the CTCN Secretariat advised them on establishing that under the CBD. And of course, now there's the BBNJ process and the question of what is a clearinghouse and what is technology transfer. So there are all sorts of lessons which could go either way, I would suggest.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. Nilofer, I can see that your hand is up now. Thank you. I think you're...
Yes, I know. Thank you. Thank you. And I also have to say, Stephen, thank you for an absolutely fantastic presentation. I agree absolutely with Christina that you really have shown your deep knowledge in an area that I think we need to know more about. It really, as I listened to you, it was very clear just how important this process is. And in a little bit, I'm going to follow up on the question that Petra had asked initially and tie it into sustainable development as well. And that is also part of the Paris Agreements in Article 2, part of enhancing the implementation and response within the context of sustainable development. And I think that that is so critical if we're talking about increasing ambition. Technology is key. It's not about new technology necessarily, but a lot of developing countries have old technology or don't have technology. So it's transferring existing good technology to these countries as well. So I have to say that I may take a little different view, that we have to look at it from the context of the developing world, that relationship that goes there. But having said that, you raised something on the BBNJ, and this is an issue that is also important. And I think how can the BBNJ process look to the experience of the Paris Agreement? Because the law of the Sea Convention actually specifically talks about the transfer of marine technology, but they don't have a mechanism. So it would be interesting to see if that linkage could be made. But I just wanted to say a fantastic presentation. And I hope that we can continue this dialogue as well. But I know that there's also a couple of other questions, and Christina has one as well. So
thank you very much, Nilufer. And over to you, Christina, please.
I'll try to make it short, but it's a question relating to the governance structure under the Paris Agreement. Stephen, you probably know that if a party meets challenges with implementing its commitment under the Paris Agreement or even in its NDC, it can bring this issue to the attention of the Paris Committee on Implementation and Compliance. And in dealing with an issue that a party brings to the committee can assist the party in engaging with institutions under the Paris Agreement on support, including technology transfer. And I was just wondering, is a technology mechanism per se aware of that link? And if so, would you see any added value on that link and how that can be operationalized?
My suspicion is that the tech is, or many tech members are not aware of that link. I think that is a very important potential future linkage, future collaboration, future relationship, which is there. And I think that the PAEC committee has a very important role to play, but also a particular role to play in helping to educate the other constituted bodies of their role under this new function, which is not something that most negotiators or most constituted body members who tend not to be lawyers, although some are. This is not something that has been core business, but I think it's very important to look at in the future.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now we are at the limit of our time. There's one last question, and I think that would give you the opportunity to really round this up very nicely. So again, thank you for the insightful webinar. That's from Tracy Leon. What is your expectation for COP26 in terms of the outcome on the technology mechanism? What do you expect? Thank you. Well,
I expect a few things. Let me just bring up the screen again, because it's easier to say this. So what will definitely happen? The COP will respond to the second independent review of the CTCN, which is being conducted as we speak by consultants. And this is a very important process to essentially improve the work of the CTCN. The COP will respond to 2 years of annual reports. I should say both the COP and the CMA will respond to 2 years of annual reports from the TEC and the CTCN. There are a number of other things. Importantly, this question of aligning the assessment of the technology mechanism and the CTCN review will be hopefully dealt with so that we can realize efficiencies and make those two processes work even better. We will begin the first assessment of the periodic the first periodic assessment of the technology mechanism. So again, these are all governance functions. These are attempts by the COP and the CMA to improve the work of these implementing bodies. And the COP may, I expect it will also consider the constitution of the CTCN advisory board. So who sits essentially on the CTCN advisory board, as well as a number of other topics such as linkages between the technology mechanism and the financial mechanism. In Katowice, the topic of linkages between the technology mechanism and the financial mechanism were considered, and the COP asked this to be looked at again in 2 years with a view to perhaps concluding this item. So it's a question of whether parties are happy with the current relationship between the technology bodies and the finance bodies, or whether parties want to develop that further. And then, of course, there's the global stocktake, which is in the background, reporting on finance, technology, capacity building support. So none of this is the headline, the top stories of the COP, but it's part of the work of implementing the Paris Agreement, which we're all committed to and which has to be taken up as a matter of urgency.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I know we have taken a lot of your time, but you have also shared a lot of your knowledge, and it was absolutely fascinating, very insightful, very educational. I have learned a lot, and so massive thank you to you, and really also to the audience. It's fantastic questions, very engaging session again. I would like to make one more announcement, because this was lecture 5, and we have already lecture 6 coming up on the 2nd of July. So please stay with us. So on the 2nd of July, we will have Professor Salibul Haq from the ICAT, and he will speak on the perspective of least developed countries on loss and damage from climate change. And that will be at 12 noon UK time. So please join us again for that lecture and for the following lectures, of course. I would also like to thank, of course, Christina and Niloufar to do this with me. It's absolutely lovely and great to see you every month. It's really nice to be on this road together. I would also like to thank Stan, who had to leave now for another meeting, for his tremendous support with all the administration that is happening behind the scenes. That is also happening at the CIL behind the scenes. So we've got Gary also working there on the support. So with that, I think I will wrap this up, and thank you again very much, all of you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot. Take care.